The ocean raged around the blue horizon, a fishing boat carrying Captain Elias and his crew. Towering waves slammed against the hull, and the sky hung low with dark clouds. Rain lashed the deck, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The radio crackled with static, useless in the storm. Elias wiped salt water from his eyes, then froze. Something moved in the churning water. Not a shark, not debris. "Man overboard?" His first mate, Rico, shouted over the wind. Elias grabbed the binoculars. His grip tightened. A German shepherd, its head barely above the surface, was fighting for its life. The dog's paws churned desperately, but the current dragged it under again. "What the hell's a dog doing 135 miles from land?" Rico yelled. The crew scrambled to lower a rescue net. As the dog was pulled closer, its eyes locked onto Elias. Not fear, not panic, a silent plea. When they finally hauled it onto the deck, the dog collapsed, ribs pressing against its soaked fur. A cracked leather collar dangled from its neck. No tags, no name. Then the twist. The dog suddenly jerked upright, nostrils flaring. It lunged toward the edge of the boat, barking wildly into the storm. Elias followed its gaze. A life raft. Empty. Tossed by the waves. But the dog kept barking, staring at it like someone should have been there. The crew of the Blue Horizon stood frozen as the German shepherd kept barking at the empty life raft. Captain Elias felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold ocean spray. There was something unnatural about this whole situation. A dog doesn't just appear 135 miles offshore, and it definitely doesn't focus on an empty raft with such desperate intensity. Rico moved first, grabbing a boat hook to pull the drifting raft closer. "Maybe there's something inside," he muttered. The other crew members exchanged nervous glances. The storm was getting worse, the waves now reaching terrifying heights, but everyone's attention was locked on that orange speck bobbing in the angry sea. As the raft bumped against the boat's side, the dog's behavior became even more frantic. It whined and pawed at the deck, its claws scraping against the wet wood. Elias reached down to calm the animal, but the moment his hand touched the dog's head, he felt something hard beneath its fur. Parting the soaked hair, his fingers found a small, waterproof capsule attached to the collar. "Bring it inside," Elias shouted over the wind as he hurried toward the cabin, the dog following close behind. The crew crowded around as he pried open the capsule. Inside was a folded note and a single key. The paper contained just 3 words. "They're watching. Trust no one." A loud bang from the deck made everyone jump. The dog immediately went on alert, growling low in its throat. Rico ran to check and came back pale. "The raft, it's gone, just vanished." Elias felt the weight of the key in his palm. The dog pressed against his legs, warm and solid despite being half drowned minutes ago. Outside, the storm raged on, but now it felt different. Less like nature's fury and more like a distraction. The radio suddenly crackled to life with a burst of static, then a voice came through clear as day. "Blue Horizon, this is Coast Guard Sector 9. Do you copy?" The crew exchanged confused looks. They hadn't been able to get any signal for hours. Elias reached for the mic, but the dog clamped its jaws around his wrist, not hard enough to break skin but with clear warning. Through the cabin window, a shadow moved across the waves. Something much larger than their fishing boat, keeping pace with them just beneath the surface. The radio crackled again. "Blue Horizon, we show you retrieving an unauthorized vessel. Maintain position for boarding." The dog released Elias's wrist and began pushing him toward the door with its body. its eyes filled with urgent intelligence no ordinary animal should possess. Outside, the water began to churn unnaturally, forming patterns that looked almost mechanical. Elias made a decision. "Rico, get us out of here. Full speed. Now." As the engines roared to life, the dog positioned itself at the stern, watching their wake with unsettling focus. The last thing Elias saw before the rain obscured everything was a massive, dark shape breaking the surface behind them, and what looked like blinking red lights where eyes should be. The key burned in his pocket. Whatever this was, it was far from over. The storm, the dog, the message, none of it made sense. But one thing was certain. They were caught in something much bigger than a simple rescue mission, and the only one who seemed to know what was happening was the mysterious German shepherd, now standing guard on their deck. The engines of the Blue Horizon groaned in protest as Rico pushed them beyond their recommended limits. The boat shuddered violently as it crashed through waves that now seemed to be coming at them from all directions at once. Elias gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his eyes darting between the storm ahead and the dark shape that had surfaced behind them. The German shepherd stood rigid at the stern, its fur standing on end as it stared unblinking into the chaos behind them. The radio kept crackling with that same too-clear voice repeating its demand for them to stop, but Elias had stopped responding the moment he saw those unnatural red lights in the water. The key in his pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He could feel its outline pressing against his thigh with every lurch of the boat. The dog had reacted so strongly to it, and to the radio transmission. There was clearly something important about both. As another wave slammed into the port side, sending spray across the entire deck, Elias made a decision. "Rico, take the wheel," he shouted over the storm. The first mate grabbed control without question as Elias stumbled toward the cabin, the dog immediately at his heels. Inside, with the door slammed shut against the howling wind, the sudden relative quiet was almost deafening. Elias pulled the key from his pocket and examined it under the flickering cabin light. It was an unusual design, not like any boat key he'd ever seen. The teeth were arranged in a strange, almost organic pattern, and the bow was engraved with symbols that looked like a mix of nautical flags and something much older. The dog whined softly and nudged his hand with its nose, then looked pointedly at the chart table in the corner of the cabin. Elias moved to the table, where their navigational charts were spread out, weighted down against the boat's movement. The dog jumped up and placed one massive paw directly on a spot about 50 miles northeast of their current position. When Elias looked closer, he realized it wasn't a marked location, just open ocean according to their charts. But the dog was insistent, scratching at the paper until it tore slightly. Then it did something that made Elias's blood run cold. It tapped the spot 3 times with its paw, waited, then tapped twice more. A deliberate pattern, a code. A loud bang from outside made them both jump. The dog's ears flattened against its head as a new sound joined the storm. A deep, resonant humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The cabin lights flickered wildly, and for a brief moment Elias could have sworn he saw the shadows in the corner of the room move independently of the boat's motion. The dog growled low in its throat, the sound more of a vibration than anything audible. Elias looked back at the chart, then at the key, then at the dog. "What are you trying to show me?" he whispered. The dog's response was to clamp its jaws gently around his wrist again and pull him toward the cabin's small storage locker. Inside, buried under spare parts and old fishing gear, was a metal box Elias had never seen before. It was about the size of a briefcase, made of some dull gray alloy that didn't look like any metal he knew. The surface was covered in the same strange symbols as the key. The humming outside grew louder. The boat suddenly lurched violently to starboard as if something massive had brushed against it from below. Elias heard Rico scream something unintelligible over the storm. The dog was practically vibrating with tension now, its eyes locked on the box. With shaking hands, Elias inserted the key. It turned with an audible click that seemed too loud in the confined space. The lid of the box opened just a crack before Elias had to throw his weight against it. Whatever was inside didn't want to be revealed. When it finally gave way, the contents made no sense at all. Nestled in molded foam was what appeared to be a large, smooth stone about the size of a grapefruit. Pitch black, but with faint veins of blue light pulsing through it like a slow heartbeat. Next to it was a small, ancient-looking book bound in what looked like the fish skin and a modern military-grade GPS device. The moment the box was open, the German shepherd let out a sound that was half whine, half howl. Outside, the storm seemed to redouble its fury. The radio, which had gone silent, suddenly blared to life with a burst of static followed by a voice that was definitely not human. It was too perfectly modulated, too devoid of inflection. Containment breach detected. Retrieval protocol initiated. Elias reached for the stone without thinking. The moment his fingers made contact, three things happened simultaneously. The dog collapsed as if struck. The storm outside ceased so abruptly it was like someone had flipped a switch, and the dark shape that had been following them broke the surface less than 100 yards off their port side. It wasn't a submarine, it wasn't anything Elias recognized. Smooth and black, and shaped like no vessel ever designed by human hands, it rode the suddenly calm seas with impossible grace. Along its flank, those same red lights pulsed in a rhythm that matched the stone's glow. The dog stirred weakly at Elias's feet, its eyes reflecting the eerie blue light from the stone as it looked up at him with what could only be described as pleading. The radio crackled one last time. The voice was different now, strained, almost desperate. Don't let them take it back. The gate must stay closed. Then silence. Elias looked from the stone to the approaching thing, to the dog. He had about 30 seconds to decide what to do before whatever was on that black ship reached them. The answers were clearly in this box, but there was no time to understand them now. The dog managed to struggle to its feet and positioned itself between Elias and the cabin door, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. Outside, the black ship was deploying something. Not a boat, but a walkway that extended across the water toward them with unnatural smoothness. The stone in Elias's hand grew warmer. The veins of blue light pulsed faster. And in his mind, clear as day, he heard a voice that wasn't his own. Choose. The stone pulsed in Elias's hand like a living thing, its rhythm accelerating until the blue veins nearly outshone the cabin lights. That single word, choose, echoed in his skull with an urgency that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. The German shepherd swayed on its feet but held its ground between him and the door, its body trembling with effort, yet radiating a protective fury that defied its weakened state. Outside, the black walkway from the ship had nearly reached the blue horizon, gliding over the eerily calm water with unnatural precision. Elias's mind raced. What kind of choice was this? Between what and what? The stone grew hotter, almost burning his palm, yet he couldn't bring himself to drop it. The dog whined and snapped its gaze toward the metal box, where the fish skin book lay half exposed. Acting on impulse, Elias grabbed the book and flipped it open. The pages were covered in dense, handwritten text. Some in languages he didn't recognize, others in frantic English entries that seemed to jump across time. One passage stood out, underlined in what looked like blood. The gate is a wound. The stone is the bandage. They will come when it weakens. The shepherd knows the way. Below it, a crude sketch of a dog with two intelligent eyes, its paws on a swirling vortex. The GPS device beside it blinked to life suddenly, displaying coordinates that matched where the dog had tapped earlier. 50 miles northeast. A countdown appeared on the screen. 0, 0, 0, 4, 59. 0, 0, 0, 4, 58. A metallic clang shook the boat as the walkway connected to their railing. The dog lunged at the cabin door just as something heavy struck it from outside. The wood splintered inward, revealing a segmented black tendril probing through the gap. The radio shrieked with that synthetic voice again. Containment failure imminent. Surrender the core. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps. None of this made sense, but the countdown on the GPS and the dog's desperate barks told him one thing. They had to move. Now, he shoved the stone into his jacket pocket, wincing at its heat, and grabbed the GPS. The dog bolted out the moment he kicked open the cabin's rear hatch, leading him through the galley toward the engine room. Behind them, the door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Elias didn't look back. He could hear Rico screaming topside, then a wet, choking silence. The engine room door was rusted shut, but the dog slammed its body against it with unnatural force, bursting the latch. Inside, the cramped space reeked of oil and salt. The dog scrambled toward a floor grate Elias had never noticed, too perfectly square to be original to the boat. Its paws worked at the edges until the grate lifted, revealing a hidden compartment barely large enough for a man to crouch in. A thunderous crash shook the boat. The lights died, plunging them into darkness, save for the stone's glow. The dog jumped into the hole and stared up at Elias, panting. Another crash, closer this time. Metal screamed. Something was tearing the blue horizon apart. Elias dropped into the compartment just as the engine room door crumpled like foil. In the blackness, the dog pressed against him, its body radiating an unnatural warmth. The grate slid back into place above them with a soft click. Silence. Then, a vibration. The compartment moved, detaching from the boat with a hydraulic hiss. Elias's stomach lurched as they began to descend. Water seeped through the seams, but the compartment self-sealed with a gelatinous membrane. The stone's glow illuminated the dog's face inches from his own. Its eyes held a depth of understanding no animal should possess. "Hold on," that voice in his head whispered again. Then, impact. A grinding roar of metal. The compartment tumbled through darkness, Elias's body slamming against the walls. The dog anchored itself around him, taking the brunt of the blows. When the motion stopped, they were submerged. Blue-green light filtered through the membrane. Outside, the wreckage of the blue horizon sank slowly past them. Its hull peeled open like a tin can. And beyond it, the black ship loomed, its red lights scanning the depths. But it wasn't alone. Deeper down, something enormous stirred. A shape that made the black ship look like a toy. Jagged spires of structures rose from the seabed, forming a ring around a swirling darkness. The GPS in Elias's hand vibrated. The countdown hit 0000. The stone in his pocket screamed, a soundless psychic wail that made his vision blur. The dog clamped its jaws on his sleeve and pulled him toward the membrane. It parted like liquid. Cold salt water flooded in, and the last thing Elias saw before the darkness took him was the dog swimming down, straight toward the swirling abyss, its body outlined in the same blue light as the stone. The cold hit Elias like a physical blow as the water swallowed him whole. His lungs burned instantly, screaming for air that wasn't there. The salt water stung his eyes, but through the blur, he could still see the German shepherd diving deeper, its body cutting through the water with impossible grace. The stone in his pocket had stopped screaming the moment they entered the water, but now it pulsed with a new rhythm, slower, heavier, like a heartbeat syncing with the ocean's currents. The light from it spread through the water in eerie blue tendrils, illuminating shapes in the depths that made Elias's mind recoil. The spires they'd seen from the compartment weren't just structures. They were bones. Enormous, ancient ribs of some long-dead leviathan, arranged in a perfect circle around the swirling darkness below. The pressure built in Elias's skull as they descended. His vision tunneled. Just as he was certain his lungs would explode, the dog circled back and clamped its jaws on his collar, dragging him downward with sudden urgency. The motion triggered something in the stone. It grew hotter, sending a wave of warmth through Elias's body that neutralized the crushing pressure. He could breathe again, not air exactly, but something thicker, richer, that filled his lungs without drowning him. The dog released him, its eyes glowing the same blue as the stone, and turned toward the abyss. They passed through the first ring of bones. The water changed instantly, warmer, thicker, alive with darting shapes that fled from the stone's light. The black ship hovered above them, its red light scanning frantically, but it didn't follow, couldn't follow. The swirling darkness ahead wasn't water anymore. It was a threshold, a tier. The edges shimmered like oil on asphalt, and through it, Elias caught glimpses of a city, not human, not even close. Towers of black coral twisted in geometries that hurt to look at. Bridges of glowing jellyfish flesh pulsed between them, and movement, shapes flitting through the structures, too fast to focus on. The dog swam straight for the tear without hesitation. Elias tried to resist, but the stone in his pocket pulled, as if tethered to something on the other side. The last rational part of his mind screamed that this was suicide, but then the radio voice echoed in his head again, clearer now. The gate must stay closed. Except, it wasn't the radio voice. It was the dog's voice, or the stone's, or both. They crossed the threshold. The pressure shift knocked Elias unconscious for a heartbeat. When he came to, he was kneeling on a surface that looked like wet glass, but felt like skin. The air was breathable, but tasted of copper and ozone. The dog stood beside him, dry now, its fur crackling with static. The city loomed around them, but up close it was worse. The coral towers weren't built. They'd grown, fused with machinery made of the same organic-looking metal as the black ship, and the things moving through them. Elias's brain refused to process them at first. Humanoid but stretched, elongated, their limbs bending in too many places. They had no faces, just smooth planes of flesh where features should be, but they noticed him. A ripple passed through the nearest group, and they turned in unison. The dog let out a subsonic growl that vibrated the ground. One of the creatures raised a hand, if it was a hand, and the stone in Elias's pocket answered, glowing so brightly it cast shadows through the coral towers. A new voice boomed through the air, coming from everywhere at once. "You brought it back." The ground trembled. A spire cracked open like an egg, and something emerged. A second German shepherd. Bigger, older. Its fur was patchy with scars, and its eyes were fully blue, no pupils at all. It walked toward them slowly, each step making the ground ripple. The first dog, Elias's dog, lowered its head in submission but didn't back down. The scarred dog stopped a few feet away and spoke, its mouth not moving, the words forming directly in Elias's mind. "The cycle breaks tonight. You will witness." Then it turned and limped toward the city's heart. Elias's dog nudged him to follow. Behind them, the tear in reality flickered, and through it, Elias saw the black ship firing something into the water, a projectile that moved like a living thing, straight toward the gate. The scarred dog didn't even glance back. It already knew. They were out of time. The ground beneath Elias's feet pulsed like a living thing as he followed the scarred German shepherd deeper into the alien city. The air grew thicker with each step, clinging to his skin like damp silk. His own dog, if it even was a dog, stayed close, its body tense and alert. The towering coral structures loomed overhead, their surfaces shifting subtly as if breathing. Strange symbols carved into their bases glowed the same eerie blue as the stone in Elias's pocket, reacting to its presence with increasing intensity. The faceless creatures kept their distance but moved in unsettling synchronicity, always turning to watch as the group passed. Ahead, the scarred dog led them toward the city's central spire, a massive structure that twisted up into the hazy non-sky like a corkscrew. As they approached, the ground sloped downward, revealing a circular plaza paved with what looked like black glass. At its center stood a pedestal shaped like a claw, its talons curving inward to cradle an empty space roughly the size of the stone Elias carried. The scarred dog stopped at the plaza's edge and turned to face him. Its voice echoed directly into Elias's skull, bypassing his ears entirely. The core must return. The wound must close. Elias's hand moved to his pocket instinctively, fingers closing around the stone. It vibrated in response, sending a jolt up his arm that made his teeth ache. Behind them, a deep, resonant boom shook the city. The ground trembled, and several coral towers cracked, oozing a thick, iridescent fluid. The faceless creatures scattered, their movements frantic for the first time. Elias's dog growled and nudged him forward urgently. The scarred dog didn't wait. It limped toward the pedestal, its paws leaving glowing prints on the black glass that faded slowly. Another boom, closer this time. Elias glanced back toward the gate just in time to see the projectile from the black ship breach the threshold. It wasn't a weapon. It was a being. A humanoid figure encased in the same organic metal as the ship, its surface peeling back in segmented plates as it adjusted to the alien atmosphere. Red lights pulsed where its eyes should be, scanning the city until they locked onto Elias. The scarred dog didn't even turn. It simply raised its head and howled, a sound that shouldn't have been possible in this airless place. Yet it reverberated through the plaza like a physical force. The moment the howl faded, the faceless creatures stopped fleeing. They turned as one and moved toward the intruder, their elongated limbs unfolding in ways that made Elias's stomach lurch. The metal being raised its arms, and twin beams of crimson light sliced through the first wave of creatures, reducing them to bubbling puddles of black ooze. But more came, hundreds more, pouring from the towers, the ground itself, even the air, materializing from nowhere to swarm the invader. The scarred dog barked once, sharply, and Elias's attention snapped back to the pedestal. Now, its voice commanded in his head. Elias hesitated. The stone in his hand was burning now, the blue veins pulsing in time with the plaza's glow. He could feel its want, an almost sentient need to be placed in that clawed cradle. But something held him back. The metal being was fighting its way closer, despite the swarm. And in that moment Elias realized it wasn't attacking him, it was trying to reach the pedestal. His dog suddenly lunged forward and clamped its jaws around his wrist, not hard enough to break skin, but with enough pressure to make him drop the stone. It fell toward the pedestal in slow motion, twisting as if caught in an invisible current. The scarred dog moved with impossible speed, catching the stone midair and placing it directly into the claw's grasp. The effect was instantaneous. A shock wave of blue light erupted from the pedestal, racing outward in concentric rings. The coral towers shuddered and changed, their twisted geometries straightening, their surfaces smoothing. The faceless creatures froze mid-motion, then dissolved into mist. The metal being let out a distorted scream as the light hit it, its outer shell flaking away to reveal a human face underneath. Elias had just enough time to recognize Rico's features twisted in agony before the light consumed him entirely. The scarred dog howled again, and the ground beneath Elias's feet liquefied. He sank into the black glass like it was quicksand, his dog diving in after him. The last thing he saw before the plaza swallowed them whole was the scarred dog standing guard over the now fully powered pedestal, its blue eyes meeting his with something like sorrow. Then, darkness, cold, the sensation of being pulled. The life raft rocked gently as the blue horizon drew closer, its familiar silhouette cutting through the calm waters with impossible normalcy. Elias clutched the raft's edges, his fingers digging into the rubber as he struggled to reconcile what he'd just experienced with the mundane sight before him. The German shepherd panted beside him, its new collar glinting in the sunlight, proof that something had changed, even if everything else appeared reset. As the fishing boat pulled alongside them, Elias expected to see Rico's face peering over the rail, but instead, a stranger with a weather-beaten face and a captain's hat frowned down at them. "You folks need help?" the man called, his voice carrying none of the tension Elias remembered from their first encounter. Elias's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't his crew. This wasn't even his boat, not exactly. The Blue Horizon's paint was fresher, its rigging slightly different. The dog let out a low whine and nudged his hand, as if sensing his disorientation. When the crew lowered a ladder, Elias climbed up on shaky legs, the dog following effortlessly behind. The deck was pristine, no signs of the damage he'd witnessed. The captain, definitely not Elias, studied him with concern. "You're lucky we found you," he said. "What happened?" Elias opened his mouth, but no words came. How could he explain? The dog saved him by suddenly stiffening, its ears pricking toward the cabin door. A familiar static crackle emanated from inside, the radio. The captain seemed not to hear it, but Elias recognized that sound instantly. Without thinking, he pushed past the confused crew and threw open the cabin door. The radio sat on the desk, spitting white noise, but beside it was something new. A small, watertight case marked with the same symbols as the dog's collar. The captain followed him in, eyebrows raised. "That's odd," he muttered. "Wasn't there earlier?" The dog lunged forward and clamped its jaws around the case, dragging it toward Elias with urgent whines. The captain backed away, hands raised. "What the hell?" Elias ignored him, prying open the case. Inside lay a single item, a faded photograph of the Blue Horizon's crew, his crew, Rico included, standing on deck with the German shepherd at their feet. The date scrawled in the corner made Elias's blood run cold. 1992. 30 years before his voyage. The radio static sharpened suddenly, resolving into a voice. Not the synthetic one from before, but a human voice, strained and desperate. "Elias, if you're hearing this, you're in the wrong loop. The dog knows. Follow it. Don't trust the—" The transmission cut off with a burst of interference. The captain paled. "That's impossible. Our radio's been dead since yesterday." The dog growled low in its throat, its eyes fixed on the porthole. Outside, the water had begun to darken unnaturally, spreading outward from the boat in an inky stain. The crew shouted in alarm as the first tendrils of fog crept over the rails, thick and smelling of copper. Elias's pulse hammered in his throat. This wasn't a reset. This was something else entirely. A wrong turn. The photograph trembled in his hands as the dog's collar began to glow faintly, the cymbals pulsing in rhythm with his quickening breath. Then, with a suddenness that made everyone jump, the dog bolted for the stern, barking wildly toward the horizon. Elias followed just in time to see it. Another boat emerging from the fog. The real blue horizon, weathered and battered, its deck empty save for a single figure leaning against the rail. Rico, his face gaunt, his clothes torn, one hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave. But the worst part? He wasn't alone. Behind him, barely visible in the thickening fog, stood the scarred German shepherd, its blue eyes burning like lanterns in the gloom. The fog thickened into swirling tendrils as the two blue horizons drifted closer, their hulls creaking in the unnatural silence. Elias gripped the railing, his knuckles white, as he stared at Rico's gaunt figure on the other boat. The man looked decades older than he should have, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with exhaustion, yet his eyes burned with the same intensity Elias remembered. The scarred German shepherd beside Rico didn't move, its blue eyes locked onto Elias's dog with an almost electric tension. The glowing collar around his dog's neck pulsed faster, reacting to the proximity of its counterpart. The captain of this wrong loop blue horizon, the stranger who wore Elias's face but not his memories, grabbed his arm. "We need to go, now!" he hissed, his voice low with terror. "That's not a real ship. That's a memory." Elias shook him off, unable to look away from the other boat. The Rico over there slowly raised his hand, palm outward, revealing a jagged scar in the shape of one of the alien symbols. The moment Elias's eyes landed on it, his dog let out a pained yelp and collapsed, its body spasming. The scarred dog across the water mirrored the movement, its legs buckling as if connected by invisible strings. The fog surged forward, swallowing the other blue horizon in seconds, but not before Elias saw Rico mouth two words: "Find her." Then the fog receded, taking the other ship with it. The water went perfectly calm. The dog at Elias's feet whimpered, struggling to stand. The captain backed away, his face ashen. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "This can't be—" A loud crack cut him off as the radio in the cabin exploded in a shower of sparks. The crew screamed, but Elias barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the photograph still clutched in his hand. The edges were crumbling now, disintegrating like wet paper, but the image remained clear. His crew, his dog, but with one detail he'd missed before. A woman standing slightly apart from the group, her face blurred as if the camera couldn't focus on her. Her hand rested on the dog's head, her fingers curled in a way that suggested familiarity. The dog finally regained its footing and immediately lunged for the cabin, dragging Elias along by his sleeve. Inside, the walls were bleeding, not blood, but that same iridescent fluid from the alien city, oozing from between the planks. The dog ignored. It, going straight for the chart table and slamming its paw onto a specific coordinate. Not the open ocean this time, but a small island marked "Restricted, Do Not Approach" in faded red ink. The moment its paw made contact, the dog's collar flared bright enough to cast shadows, and the fluid on the walls formed words. "She is the key." Then, as suddenly as it started, the phenomenon stopped. The fluid retreated into the wood. The dog's collar dimmed. Outside, the crew was shouting about abandoning ship. The captain burst in, wild-eyed. "We're leaving. Now get to the lifeboats if you want to live." Elias didn't move. "What's on this island?" he demanded, pointing to the chart. The captain froze. His face went through a series of twitches before settling on something like resignation. "You weren't supposed to ask that," he whispered. Then, in one fluid motion, he drew a knife from his belt and stabbed himself in the throat. Elias barely had time to recoil before the man's body hit the floor and began dissolving, his flesh bubbling away to reveal the same organic metal skeleton they'd seen in Rico. The dog snarled, positioning itself between Elias and the corpse as the remaining crew outside let out a chorus of screams. Through the porthole, Elias saw why. The water had turned black and viscous, and things were moving beneath the surface, long, segmented shapes rising toward the boat. The dog didn't wait. It clamped down on Elias's wrist and pulled him toward the stern, where a single lifeboat hung ready for launch. As they jumped in and Elias released the davits, the Blue Horizon's deck erupted in geysers of that same black water, the crewmen vanishing beneath the flood. The lifeboat hit the waves with a jolt, and the dog immediately began paddling, not away from the sinking ship, but toward the island on the chart. Behind them, the Blue Horizon listed violently to port, and just before it went under, Elias saw her, the blurred woman from the photograph, standing calmly on the deck, watching them go. Her face came into focus for one split second. She looked exactly like the scarred dog. The lifeboat cut through the inky water, propelled by some unseen current as much as the dog's steady paddling. Elias clutched the sides, his mind reeling from the impossible sight of that woman, her features shifting like smoke before mirroring the scarred dog's too intelligent eyes. The island loomed ahead, its shoreline jagged with black rocks that looked more like broken teeth than stone. A dense jungle pulsed beyond the beach, its foliage an unnatural shade of violet in the fading light. The dog's collar glowed brighter with every yard they gained, casting eerie blue reflections on the water that revealed shapes moving beneath them. Not fish, but elongated shadows that kept perfect pace with the boat. As they scraped onto the rocky beach, the dog leaped out before the lifeboat fully stopped, its body tense as it scanned the tree line. The jungle exhaled a warm, metallic-smelling breeze that made Elias's skin prickle. He stepped onto the shore and immediately sank to his ankles, not in sand, but in a fine black powder that hissed faintly underfoot. The dog growled low in its throat as the trees ahead parted with a sound like tearing paper, revealing a path that hadn't been there a second before. The choice was obvious. They walked. The jungle closed behind them, the foliage knitting itself back together with a rustle that felt too deliberate. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, and Elias realized why. The trees weren't trees at all. They were petrified versions of the coral towers from the alien city, their branches frozen in mid-sway as if caught in some ancient catastrophe. The dog led him deeper, its paws leaving glowing prints in the black powder that lingered just long enough to mark their trail. After what felt like hours, the path opened into a clearing dominated by a ruined structure. Part bunker, part temple, its concrete walls fused with those same organic metal sheets Elias had seen aboard the black ship. And, sitting cross-legged atop the rubble, was the woman. She wasn't blurry now. Every detail was painfully sharp. Her gaunt face, her two long fingers, the military-style fatigues she wore that had clearly been patched 100 times over. But it was her eyes that stopped Elias cold. One was human. The other was pure blue, pupil-less, identical to the scarred dog's. She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice rasping like sandpaper. The dog whined and crouched at her feet, its collar dimming in her presence. Elias's throat was too dry to speak. The woman, if she was a woman, tilted her head. "You're not asking the right questions, sailor." "I'll start. Do you know what year it is?" He swallowed hard. 2023. Her laugh was a bark. "Try 2047. You've been looping for 24 years, Elias, or rather, a version of you has. She stood, unfolding to a height that made Elias step back. They used your memories to build the simulations. Every storm, every rescue, even the goddamn dog. She nudged the German shepherd with her boot. This one's new, though. Cute trick. Elias's mind reeled. The dog, pressed against his legs, warm and solid, the only real thing in this nightmare. "Who are you?" he managed. She tapped her mismatched eyes. "Dr. Rachel Kessler, project lead for Gatekeeper. At least I was before the breach." She gestured to the ruins around them. "This was our facility. We found the first gate right where you left your little present, 50 miles northeast of nowhere." Her human eye twitched. "Then we found out why it was buried. A rustle in the petrified trees. The scarred dog emerged, its fur matted with that same iridescent fluid. It went straight to Kessler, nuzzling her hand with an intimacy that made Elias's stomach turn. She scratched behind its ears. They're not dogs, obviously. More like custodians. This one's been with me since the first breach. The other," she pointed to Elias's dog, "is a rogue element, something they didn't account for." The ground trembled. Somewhere in the jungle, trees cracked and fell. Kessler's smile vanished. "Ah, right on schedule." She grabbed Elias's arm with surprising strength. "Listen carefully. The gate you saw, it's not a door, it's a lock. And what's inside wants out. Your little stone was one of 7 keys keeping it sealed." She tapped his temple. "Your head's holding another. That's why they've been cycling you through simulations, to find where you hid it." The tremors worsened. The scarred dog bared its teeth at the jungle. Kessler shoved Elias toward a half-buried hatch in the rubble. "Go, downstairs, find the others." Elias resisted. What others? Her grin was all teeth. The real crew of the Blue Horizon. Then the trees exploded inward, and the thing that came through was neither dog nor human nor machine, but some nightmare fusion of all three, its body studded with blinking red lights. Kessler drew a pistol from her waistband, oddly normal in all this madness, and fired into the jungle. "Go!" The dogs moved as one, dragging Elias toward the hatch as Kessler's screams turned wet behind them. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was his own dog pausing to look back, its eyes glowing the same eerie blue as the thing in the trees. The hatch slammed shut above them with a finality that vibrated through Elias's bones. Darkness swallowed them whole, thick and suffocating, until the dog's collar flickered to life, casting pulsing blue light across a rusted metal staircase descending into the earth. The air smelled of ozone and something older, wet stone and forgotten machinery. The scarred dog went first, its claws clicking against the steps with military precision, while Elias's own dog pressed against his back, herding him downward with quiet urgency. The sounds of Kessler's last stand faded above, replaced by a new noise rising from below, a rhythmic thumping like a massive heartbeat, shaking dust from the ceiling with each pulse. The staircase ended in a cavernous chamber that defied logic. The walls were lined with hundreds of glass pods, each containing a floating human figure connected to a tangle of organic-looking cables. Elias's breath caught as he recognized faces. Rico, the Blue Horizon's crew, even versions of himself. Their features slack in artificial sleep. The pods were arranged in concentric circles around a central dais where 7 stone pedestals stood, 6 of them empty. The 7th held a familiar object. Another glowing stone, identical to the one Elias had carried, its blue veins pulsing in time with the chamber's heartbeat. The scarred dog bounded to the dais and sat before the occupied pedestal like a sentinel. Elias's dog nudged him toward the nearest pod, one containing a younger, healthier-looking Kessler, her body free of scars, her eyes closed peacefully. A control panel at the pod's base flickered with alien symbols, but one word stood out in stark English: custodian. Before Elias could react, his dog lunged forward and clamped its jaws around a cable, yanking it free with a shower of sparks. The effect was instantaneous. Kessler's eyes flew open, both human now, and she gasped like a drowning woman breaking the surface. The pod's fluid drained with a hiss, and she collapsed into Elias's arms, her body shuddering. "Took you long enough," she choked out, her voice softer than the version above ground. Her fingers dug into his shoulders with surprising strength as she locked eyes with him. They're not simulations. They're batteries. Every loop drains them to keep the gate stable. She gestured weakly toward the other pods. "Your crew, my team, even you." The chamber lights brightened abruptly, revealing what Elias had missed. The cables weren't just connected to the pods. They snaked across the floor to the far wall, where they fused with a massive iris-like door made of the same organic metal. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Elias could see the same swirling darkness from the underwater gate. But this one was larger, more unstable, its edges fraying like torn fabric. The scarred dog began barking wildly at it, its blue eyes blazing. Kessler struggled to stand. "That's the primary gate. The one underwater was just a shadow. This dot, dot, dot." She coughed, a trickle of black fluid leaking from her nose. "This is where they're coming through, where they've been coming through since 1992. She pointed to the pedestals. "The stones are anchors. Each one represents a sacrificed custodian." Her gaze fell on Elias's dog. "Except yours. She's different, wild. That's why they couldn't control you completely." A deep, resonant groan echoed from the door as it shuddered inward, the gap widening. The heartbeat sound accelerated. The pod's occupants began twitching in unison, their faces contorting in silent screams. Kessler grabbed Elias's arm. "They know we're here. We have minutes, maybe less." She staggered toward the dais. "The stone in your mind, it's a memory, the last key. You have to—" A pod exploded, then another and another. Figures tumbled out, their bodies contorted, their eyes wide and unseeing. They moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, converging on the dais. Not just the crew, Elias's too, dozens of them. All variations of the same man at different ages, their mouths opening in unison to recite the same phrase, "Return what you stole." The scarred dog launched itself at the horde, buying time. Kessler shoved Elias toward the central pedestal. "Do it now! Remember!" Elias's dog circled him protectively as he closed his eyes, reaching for the memory that didn't feel like his own. The chamber, the encroaching horde. Even Kessler's shouts faded as the image surfaced. A child's hands burying a small blue stone in the sand. A voice whispering, "For when the water comes." His eyes flew open. "It's not in my mind, it's—" The realization hit as the first wave of pod people reached them. The island, the black sand, the hiss it made underfoot. The stones weren't just anchors. They were seeds. And he'd planted the last one 24 years ago. The moment Elias understood, really understood, what the stones were, the chamber erupted into chaos. The pod people's chanting rose to a deafening crescendo as they surged forward, their outstretched fingers brushing against Elias's jacket before his dog intercepted them with a snarl that shook the walls. Kessler was shouting something, but her voice was lost under the groaning of the massive gate as its edges frayed further, tendrils of darkness licking out like black flames. The scarred dog had positioned itself before the pedestal, holding the last intact stone, its body trembling with effort as if physically restraining the artifact from leaping into the void. Elias stumbled backward, his boots slipping in the black fluid now oozing from the broken pods. The memory, his memory, yet not his, burned brighter in his mind. A child's hands, smaller, darker, older than they should be, burying that pulsing blue stone in wet sand while a storm raged unseen above. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The island's black sand wasn't mineral at all. It was the remains of previous stones, decayed and ground to powder over countless cycles. And now, beneath their feet, the seventh seed waited. Kessler grabbed his collar, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You planted it? Where? Exactly where?" Her human eye was bloodshot, the blue one glowing brighter as the gate's pull intensified. Before Elias could answer, one of the pod people, a younger version of Rico with too many joints in his fingers, lunged at them. Elias's dog intercepted midair, tearing into the thing's throat with a viciousness that sprayed black ichor across the floor. The fluid moved on its own, slithering toward the central dais like mercury seeking a magnet. The scarred dog howled, a sound that bypassed Elias's ears and vibrated directly in his skull, and the remaining pods shattered simultaneously, releasing a flood of twitching bodies and iridescent fluid. The chamber lights flickered, then stabilized at a lower intensity, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. In the sudden semi-darkness, Elias saw it, patterns forming in the ooze on the floor. The same symbols from the dog's collars, the same sequence his dog had tapped on the chart, a map. Kessler saw it too. "Oh God, it's here, right beneath this room." She wiped black fluid from her lips. The facility was built around it. They knew. She gripped Elias's arm hard enough to bruise. "You have to dig, now." Elias dropped to his knees, clawing at the metal floor panels. His fingers found purchase on a seam, too perfectly straight to be accidental, and pried. The panel came up with a shriek of protesting metal, revealing not earth, but a dense web of roots glowing faintly blue. They pulsed in time with the scarred dog's collar. Deeper, down. Something bigger pulsed back. The pod people froze mid-motion. The gates, groaning, ceased. Even the heartbeat sound paused, leaving a silence so absolute Elias could hear the blood rushing in his ears. Then, from the hole in the floor, a single tendril emerged. Not a root, but something smoother, more purposeful. It brushed against Elias's cheek with the delicacy of a lover's touch, leaving behind a searing cold that somehow didn't hurt. His dog went rigid. The scarred dog whimpered. The tendril retreated, and the roots began retracting, drawing back into the earth like snakes into their den. As they moved, they revealed glimpses of what lay beneath. Not stone, not metal, but the curve of something massive and smooth and unmistakably alive. The gate screamed. Not a sound, a presence, a wave of pure wrongness that sent Elias and Kessler crashing to the floor. The pod people collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. Only the dogs remained standing, their eyes locked on the widening gap in the floor as the roots fully withdrew, exposing a domed surface of flawless black material shot through with veins of blue light. It wasn't a seed, it was an egg, and it was hatching. Kessler made a choked sound. "We were wrong, all of us. The stones were never locks." She pointed a shaking finger at the scarred dog. "They are." The dog turned its glowing eyes on her and spoke, not in their minds but aloud, in a voice like grinding tectonic plates. "The cycle ends today." Above them, the facility's ceiling cracked open and the sky poured in. The sky that crashed through the fractured ceiling wasn't the sky Elias remembered. It was a swirling vortex of blues and blacks, alive with lightning that branched like veins across its surface. The egg beneath them pulsed faster, its black shell beginning to fissure along those glowing blue lines. The scarred dog stood over it, its body trembling as its collar blazed like a miniature sun. The voice that had spoken through it still hung in the air, vibrating the very molecules around them. Elias's own dog pressed against his legs, not in fear, but in readiness, its eyes fixed on the emerging cracks in the egg. Kessler dragged herself upright, her human eye wide with terror, her blue eye understanding. The pod people began dissolving, their bodies liquefying into the same iridescent fluid that now flowed in rivulets toward the egg, absorbed through the cracks like water into parched earth. The chamber shook, pieces of the ceiling crashing down around them, but the egg remained untouched, protected by some unseen force. The scarred dog turned its head to look at Elias, and in that moment he knew, not through words, but through a flood of images searing into his mind. An ancient pact, a dying civilization, a last desperate gamble to imprison something that could not be destroyed. The dogs, never dogs at all, but fragments of that lost world's will given form. The stones, not as seeds or locks, but as sacrifices, each one a piece of a living barrier meant to hold back the tide. And now, at the end of all cycles, the final choice. Kessler gasped as the understanding hit her too. "No," she whispered, "you can't mean—" The scarred dog didn't hesitate. It leaped onto the egg just as the largest crack split its surface wide. Blue light erupted, blinding in its intensity, and when it faded, the dog was gone, absorbed into the egg, its essence flowing through the fissures to reinforce the disintegrating shell. The tremors lessened. The vortex above slowed its churning, but it wasn't enough. The egg continued to fracture. Elias's dog whined and nudged his hand. The message was clear. One more guardian must remain. Kessler grabbed his arm. "There's another way," she said urgently, her voice barely audible over the groaning earth. She pointed to the pedestal where the last stone still sat. "That's a piece of you. The child who buried it knew what it meant to give. Take it back now, and we can—" A deafening crack cut her off as the egg split further, revealing a glimpse of what lay within, not a monster, but a vast, beautiful darkness shot through with starlight, a living piece of the void between worlds. The sight of it filled Elias with equal parts terror and awe. His dog barked once, sharply, and sprinted for the pedestal, seizing the stone in its jaws before anyone could react. Time seemed to slow as the dog raced back toward the egg, its body already beginning to glow, to unravel. Elias screamed its name, a name he realized he'd always known but never spoken, just as it leaped. The impact sent a shockwave of blue light radiating outward, sealing the cracks, stabilizing the egg. The vortex above collapsed in on itself with a sound like a sigh. Silence. Then, a single, perfect note, ringing through the chamber like a struck bell. The egg darkened, its light fading to a gentle pulse. The remaining roots retracted fully, burying it once more beneath the floor. The air smelled clean sharp, like after a storm. Kessler was the first to speak. "It's over?" Elias knelt, touching the spot where the egg lay hidden. In his mind, a voice, familiar yet infinitely old, whispered, "Only sleeping." He looked up at the ruined ceiling, where the first true stars in 24 years had begun to appear. His hands, he noticed, were shaking, not from fear, but from something else. The weight of a truth too large to hold. Some doors should never be opened. Some gifts come with prices too steep to pay, and some guardianship never ends, only changes hands. Kessler helped him stand. Neither spoke as they climbed back toward the surface, where dawn was breaking over a quiet sea. The island's black sand glittered strangely in the new light. Somewhere beneath their feet, two loyal hearts beat in tandem with the world's slow, steady turning. Moral lesson: the greatest courage lies not in conquering the unknown, but in knowing when to keep it caged, and being willing to stand guard forever at the door you chose to close.